Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Marcia.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This is part 2 of our episodes on Bomb Girls. And this episode we'll be focusing on the back half of season 2, so episodes 7 through 12, as well as the movie Bomb Girls Facing the Enemy that came out in 2014. So we'll get right into the plot with episode 7.
Cool, I'll start us off then. In episode 7, Gladys has been hiding away at home since James has died and she's very sad. But she also feels kind of guilty about making him a list, which she really didn't do, but she feels that way anyway.
Yeah, and she has to return James's card to his parents, which she's very upset about.
Right, beautiful card that reminds her of James. They've been in it like twice together.
The wild thing is that James's decision to enlist, where he was like, this is what you wanted me to do. They're both so immature and make so many ill-advised decisions. They're kind of perfect for each other because they both have zero common sense.
It's very true. I did like James's fellow soldier that came over to collect the car. I thought something romantic was going to happen, but then James did just die.
Yeah, but I mean, that wouldn't be unreasonable to think because Gladys has ill-advised affairs with, like, everyone.
Very true. So, in the meantime, Betty and Kate have a nice little victory garden, and they have a very big harvest from that. And also, Betty has her Seawrack friend. Her name is Teresa, and she returns with a group of other female soldiers.
One thing I do like about this show is that you get tons of background stuff about things that were going on during the war. Characters are always talking about the latest developments from the battlefield that they're hearing about on the radio or reading about in the newspaper. And then in the meantime, they're always doing things like harvesting from the victory garden or buying war bonds. They're always doing stuff in the background where you're like, oh yeah. Vera discovers a TNT shortage at the factory and Marco gets framed for it, which casts a shadow on their newly forming relationship. They made out a few times or whatever. But then Vera and Gladys discover the real culprit, who's another blue shift worker, and they're able to clear Marco's name.
Marco has a bad time on the show, really.
Marco has a terrible time because literally anytime anything goes wrong at the factory, they're like, it's probably the Italian.
It's the suspiciously handsome Italian.
He's very handsome.
As this is going on, everybody's talking about the slightly good news about the raid on Yep, which we also will talk about on our next episode about Allied. But Lorna, in the meantime, wants to hear more news, so she bullies a phone company guy into installing a phone in her home. She does this very cleverly, but she wants to hear any news about her boys. She gets kind of nervous around this phone, which I thought was really funny. But as the casualty list are slowly coming out, it becomes clear that the raid on the Yep was, in fact, a disaster. And her son Stanley, who we've not seen in the show yet, is declared MIA. But thankfully, at the very end of the episode, he calls home and he's okay.
Yeah, I did enjoy that. We literally were just talking about Dieppe for Allied, and then we got to talk about Dieppe all over again.
Yeah, I do like it though. Like you said, they just put in real-time stuff in there very cleverly, even though it's a big drama.
I do feel like it's really well researched. It's the way they present it at the beginning of the episode. Everyone's like, oh yeah, we had this raid on French soil. This is the beginning of the end of the war. This is good news. And as time goes by and they start seeing all the casualty lists, they're like, oh, maybe this is not good news. And I'm sure that's how it happened at the time, right? That's the way the news came out and that's how I learned about it. So I do enjoy that this show, like, of course, the main characters aren't real, but all the background stuff feels really historically accurate to me.
Yeah, imagine just not knowing. Information would be so slow to come out.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, the government has a vested interest in presenting things in a certain way. So you might not be getting the full picture or necessarily an accurate picture. So in episode 8, the ladies drag Gladys out on the town to forget her troubles, but she receives some unwelcome advances from a man. And she also gets some strange questions from a woman named Margie. She later discovers that Margie is a spy, but rather than a German spy, she's actually on the Allied side. And she's working for the man whose name is Clifford Perry, played by Tamo Pennicott. And Clifford tries to recruit Gladys to collect intelligence for them. So this is the beginning of a super long subplot about Gladys becoming a spy.
And this scene in which Gladys crosses a bridge in the dark with a car. I don't think the headlights are still on, but they might have been because it looks like a scene from a comic book. I don't like it. And also, the name Margie is too much like what English people call me, and I feel offended.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what it is about this spy subplot that just makes me laugh because it just seems so silly. Because a lot of things on this show happen that are very soapy and overdramatic and probably not that realistic. But for some reason, this subplot in particular feels so silly to me.
It's also because they dress Gladys in this long coat with this fancy hat on, and it's so cliche for some reason. I also really don't like Clifford Perry.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the casting or what, but I didn't think he was that great. When Gladys starts to become romantically interested in him, I'm like, girl, why? Lorna volunteers at the hospital to help out her daughter Sheila, who's a nurse, and she tries to get the ladies to come with her. And while she's there, she discovers that Sheila is getting closer with Dr. Narendra Patel, or Ned, played by Gabe Gray, but that Ned is to be wed in an arranged marriage. But Sheila actually knows this, but she's not dissuaded from the relationship, and she warns Lorna not to interfere. Which, I mean, if we know anything about Lorna at this point, that is absolutely not going to prevent Lorna from meddling in shit that's not her business. And Kate does show up and she helps out by singing to the patients. And Lorna also invites Reggie, the new factory worker, to live in her home because she's having a hard time finding a landlord for racist reasons.
Yeah. I have some feelings about some of these tiny storylines. They're great. They're not wrapped up in any way at all. We don't really see Reggie do anything anymore, even though she was introduced both to be obviously a black worker, but also to stir the pot a little with the ladies. But she's just no longer being a model or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. There's lots of things where you're like, wait a minute, whatever happened with that?
Meanwhile, Betty and Teresa get to spend some more time together, but they run into trouble. Guess what? From who? From a bunch of assholes. Men, obviously. And Betty is a little bit of a firecracker, so the second time it happens, she ends up getting a black eye. She's worried that Lorna will be upset with her, but Lorna instead praises her bravery.
Betty and Teresa are definitely getting harassed because they're two women hanging out. And of course, we, the audience, know that they're lesbians. And they're not necessarily outwardly being obvious about that, but these men are obviously upset that they're trying to make a pass at them and the women are not interested. And so Betty's really worried that this is going to come back on her, that people are going to realize that she's secretly in a queer relationship. And so it was really nice when she didn't get in trouble for having the shiner and Lorna had her back.
Yeah, very much. I like Betty, I guess, as a character. She's a tough cookie.
It's true. There's a lot of times in this show where someone will say something that's period appropriate, but very sexist. And Betty always stands up for herself. So I do enjoy that about her. In episode 9, we get introduced to Dottie Shannon, played by Rosie O'Donnell, of all people. I completely forgot that she was in this when I rewatched it the second time.
Rosie O'Donnell is in this?
Right? And she's a famous journalist. She wants to come spend some time at the factory writing about the workers. This is another cool thing that the show does. Every episode, there's a sort of overall structure that everything fits into. So it's like, oh, one episode, everything that happens is structured around a war bond drive. Or everything that happens in this episode is structured around the story that Dottie is writing. It's well put together in that way. And she ends up writing a column that mentions that Lorna works really hard and she's great at her job, but she makes half of what the men make. And the male workers all mock her. And Lorna ends up standing up for herself and asking for a raise.
She does get the raise, by the way, but not the raise that she asked for. She asks for a raise for all the girls, and her boss says one step at a time.
What I did love was that you'd think that on principle she might turn down the raise, but she's like, well, someone has to be first through the door.
Yep, I would too, to be honest. Just get the money when it comes to you. Gladys encounters Clifford again at a party thrown by her father, and she learns that the factory is working on a new explosive device. It's a device that can be carried in a can of beans. And guess who's going to be supplying those cans of beans?
Yeah, I did enjoy that she found out that her dad was going to supply the tins of beans for free, which is totally not in keeping whatsoever with anything that we've learned about her dad so far in the show.
No, he's just no longer interested suddenly in making money, which was his whole motivation for everything else. It's just like,
Yeah.
I'll do it for free.
Gladys goes with Betty to the bank, and this is more Gladys behavior. Gladys is always convinced that if you have a can-do attitude and some moxie, you can get anything done. But she doesn't realize that a lot of things have gone her way because she's rich. So she's determined, she's like, Betty, we're going to go to the bank. We're going to get you this loan. You're going to get a mortgage because Betty is dying to buy a house. And so Gladys goes with her to the bank, but the loan manager is like, listen, there's not going to be good paying jobs for women after the war is over. When the men come back, they're going to take all those good jobs. And so you're not a good credit risk for us.
Yeah, the loan manager is also a woman, by the way. Only probably because all the men are away.
Well, she even says that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't, give us loads of hope.
Kate joins a burlesque show to get a chance to sing on stage, and Vera helps her out by teaching her how to perform and act kind of sexy because Vera's great at that, and Kate spends all her time at Bible study. Ivan loses his temper because he doesn't want Kate doing all this stuff, and they break up temporarily. But then he comes around on her performing and actually asks her to marry him.
I was kind of disappointed about Ivan being upset initially. I feel like Kate only said yes to marrying him because it was the most convenient thing for her to do.
She didn't seem that excited. I almost wondered if it was because she didn't really have a family and she wanted the security of, yeah, I'll marry this guy and we'll have a house together and live happily ever after and that kind of stuff.
Marco, meanwhile, is considering quitting the factory because he has to report to a man he trained. He wants to quit, but Vera tells him she doesn't want him to leave, and they make out about it. Not during the fight, no, they just make out.
Yeah, they do make out about it. But listen, I really enjoy Vera and Marco. They're, I swear, the one relationship in the show that is healthy and that you actually sort of root for over the long term.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I did really like Marco and Lorna together in the beginning.
So in episode 10, the framing of the episode is that in the war news, the passenger ferry, the SS Caribou, has been torpedoed off of Newfoundland in the Battle of the St. Lawrence. And I wanted to talk about this because that's where my grandfather served during the war. So basically, in 1942, German submarines began to prowl the St. Lawrence because the St. Lawrence has some ports and the Canadian Maritimes have some ports sort of on the other side of the landmass there. And these were crucial components of the Allied shipping routes. And so tons of resources, supplies, troops were coming from the United States and Canada. And that's how they would access the Atlantic Ocean to travel overseas. And the deadliest attack was the sinking of the SS Caribou, as we hear about in the show, which was a passenger ferry crossing between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland on October 14th, 1942. 167 people were killed, mostly civilian passengers. The following year, in 1943, several U-boats entered the St. Lawrence for the purpose of either dropping off spies or attempting to rescue POWs. And in 1944, as shipping increased in the lead up to D-Day, U-boats really scaled up their attacks in the Gulf again. The last ship sunk by a U-boat in Canadian waters was the HMCS Eskimo on April 16th, 1945. And throughout the Battle of the St. Lawrence in that period of time there, the total tally of ships sunk in that area was 26. We're going to hear more about this when we talk about the movie in a bit. But when Gladys starts to work on the line that's building the range recorders to help ships detect U-boats. So this was like a huge thing in Canada. Like, obviously, this was a huge concern of the government and the military. And my grandpa actually served in a gun battery at Gaspé, which is kind of right at the mouth of the St. Lawrence. And their job was basically to shine these big searchlights in the water so they could find U-boats. And then if they found them, they would fire at them and try and sink them.
That's a really important job.
So the cool thing is that they still have a gun battery at Gaspé, and it's in a national park. So if anyone is in the area, you can go and check it out. He had all kinds of stories. It was really interesting and kind of frightening, but he used to talk about how in the morning they'd go down to the shoreline and there would be the butts of German cigarettes on the shore. Because the officers would get out of the U-boats and come onto the shore.
So they would know they were there, but they were no longer there.
Yeah. And my grandpa said too, he spoke German. And he said at night, if you were quiet, you could hear people speaking German out on the water.
That's creepy.
Yeah, right? Crazy. The whole time I knew him, he was hard of hearing. And part of that was when they fired the big gun, it was super loud, obviously. You're in a contained space and they didn't have any hearing protection. So their COs would be like, yeah, just lay on the floor and open your mouth to release the pressure against your eardrums. And obviously that does absolutely nothing to protect your ears.
Oh, Jesus. That's rough. So is this the national park you were talking about just now? Is that what you showed me where you can also walk through it on Google Maps?
Yeah.
So I'll put a link to that on the website.
It's really cool. I haven't been, but I would really like to go.
Please do. Meanwhile, Gladys is still working with Clifford. She has to spy on Marco, which she doesn't like at all, but it turns out that one of Marco's friends from his neighborhood is actually a fascist recruiter. He ropes Marco into a burglary gone wrong, and even though Marco doesn't want to fight, he ends up fighting, and it's really messy.
It is messy, but you do feel sympathetic because obviously he's not a fascist and doesn't believe in those things, but his mother gets kicked out of this grocery store and his father's been in an internment camp and he keeps getting into hot water at work because people are racist against Italians. And so he's having a really bad time. So you can sort of understand why he wants to get revenge against this grocery store that kicked his mom out and why he's a bit more willing to go along with this friend of his. Vera notices that Gladys is sort of following Marco around or watching him. So at first she just assumes that Gladys has designs on Marco, which is not an unreasonable thing to think based on what we know about Gladys. But after she witnesses a suspicious phone call that Marco has, she confides to Gladys that she's also worried about what he's been getting up to.
Yeah, and Marco is getting kind of cagey too around Vera. They're in a relationship, and he doesn't want to tell her what he's doing. And like, it's none of your business. So Vera is rightly worried, I would say. Lorna joins a dance class while Bobby's away, out of town with his cousin or his brother or someone or uncle, I don't know. And she has a little bit of a flirtation with her dance teacher, who's also the milkman, which I thought was really funny.
I forgot he was also the milkman.
Yeah, but she likes him, but then she kind of also feels guilty. And when she sees him again next morning as the milkman, she's like, you can leave the milk outside this time. Instead of inside my house.
I think it's really funny that there's this, I feel like, long-standing cultural joke of housewives fucking the milkman. People always make jokes like, oh, your baby looks a lot like the milkman or whatever. And in this show, they're like, you know what? She is going to try and fuck the milkman. Ivan wants to put wedding announcements in all the newspapers because, of course, he proposed and Kate said yes. And Kate, of course, is not her real name. She's living under an assumed name because she was hiding from her dad. And she finds herself having to fabricate all these lies about a fake family.
She gets kind of nervous, and you can tell that Ivan also starts noticing the fact that she's not writing to her brothers about their relationship or any sort of thing like that. And she's a little bit cagey. I like Ivan, but I specifically like him before episode 8.
Well, you know what? He was kind of a jerk about Kate being a burlesque dancer, but he did apologize. He did come around and say a mea culpa. So I'll allow it, Ivan.
That his girlfriend Teresa, the sea-work lady, ends up having to ship out.
Yeah, it's too bad for Betty because this is the first time that she gets to be happy in a relationship instead of pining away after Kate, which is never going to happen.
Yeah, but we don't know. Maybe after the war. We don't get to see the after the war, but who knows?
Yeah. In episode 11, Carol, that's Gladys's friend, if you'll recall, who works in the office, she's very excited because the Governor General is coming to tour the factory and she takes over the preparations for the day. She's really stoked about it.
I hate Carol.
Carol does kind of suck, truthfully, but she's a good antagonist for Vera for a little while because they both work in the office.
So snooty, though. She's just really annoying.
Yeah, Gladys is starting to have second thoughts about collecting intelligence on Marco after he confronts her. And she realizes that Clifford is trying to entrap him. So Clifford is sort of making it like a sting operation. And she actually enlists Marco to help get his co-conspirators arrested before they can set off an explosion that's been timed to disrupt the Governor General's visit. So she's like, why can't we get Marco to work with us instead of trying to entrap him with these other guys? And she's right. I mean,
yeah. And it turns out that his friend's father was actually the one that got Marco's dad interned. So he's kind of a jerk.
Yes. Vera actually gets demoted over her relationship with Marco because I know all of this goes down. And of course, people find out about it, that Marco was hanging around with these ne'er-do-wells. And yeah, Vera gets in trouble over it. And also, I mean, Vera has always been like a good time girl. And we talked before about how she was picking up soldiers and that kind of stuff. And it got in the way of her getting promoted before as well, because the factory boss was like, well, you have kind of a reputation. And I'm like, dang it, we're sex positive in this house. Let Vera have a job.
Bob, Lana's husband, talks to Dr. Narendra about his relationship with Sheila, and the good doctor then ends his prearranged marriage. Sheila doesn't like this very much. She's obviously very upset that her parents have intervened, despite her asking them not to. And it's kind of weird, because I thought Bob was very friendly and lenient. I was expecting him to be a little bit harder on Dr. Narendra.
Kate asked Betty to be her maid of honor as she plans her wedding to Ivan. Like, poor Betty. Hasn't she been through enough? And Kate also discovers that her mother, who she thought was dead because her dad told her that her mother was dead, her mother's actually alive.
Yeah, and they have this very cute little party for Kate. They play games and stuff, and I thought it was really sweet. And then suddenly she has a mother, which is nice.
Yeah. Nice for Kate. Kate deserves better things to happen to her than has happened thus far.
In episode 12, the Allies are making a big push against Rommel in North Africa, culminating the Second Battle of El Alamein in November 1942. Everybody at the factory is donating blood to the cause. And also, I thought it was really cute that Lorna does this, and she's really afraid of the blood being taken.
She definitely goes to give blood because she's trying to get back on Sheila's good side, and you can tell that she's so scared of having this needle. Kate and Betty finally have to face the music about what happened to Kate's father, and so this detective comes to arrest them. Ivan freaks out about it and breaks up with Kate, understandably, I guess, because he thinks that she's a murderer. Gladys posts their bail for them, and then Betty sacrifices herself by going in to confess to what happened, saying, look, he died and it was an accident and Kate wasn't there at all. She had nothing to do with it.
Betty, you're too nice. Don't do this to yourself. But also Betty's reasoning for this, I think, is that Kate wouldn't survive prison.
What was crazy to me is that the police have literally zero evidence that it was them who killed the father. No one saw it. They don't have DNA evidence. It's 1942. Just continue to be like, we didn't do it. Maybe I listened to too many true crime podcasts, but if you ever get picked up by the police and they tell you they have evidence against you, just be like, I'll believe you have evidence against me when I hear the jailhouse door close behind me. Like, they can say whatever they want to you. Even if they don't have evidence, they can say they do.
They can just lie to your face. I'll remember that when I'm ever in trouble. I'm not in trouble until it's proven.
Exactly. That's right.
Clifford invites Gladys to become a full-fledged spy at Camp X, an opportunity she seems very keen on.
This is or was a real place where they trained secret agents during World War II. There's a TV show about it, so maybe we'll cover it at some point. But yeah, another fun little real historical tidbit in there.
Cool. I just think they could have gone with any of the girls, but Gladys, I know they have their reasoning why she has to do it, because she moves between societies, basically. She can talk to the rich and she can talk to the poor, but still, I don't believe her as a spy very much.
No, she loves being the center of attention too much, and everywhere she goes, the actor is very attractive. But in the show, she walks into a room and all the men turn and look and whatever. And it's like, is this really the type of person that would be good as an undercover agent? Probably not.
You see her shooting on the practice range. She's very good, and I don't believe it for a second.
I'm not an expert on shooting. I've done it like a couple times, but the way she's standing there with the gun held out to the side, that's the hardest way to hit a target accurately. Again, I'm not an expert, but that's not how you would do it, I don't think.
Now, I think you would use both hands if you can. Steady the
Yeah.
gun either way, but it's not as pretty, so I guess that's why they've done it.
Yeah. And when you go to the gun range, you have to wear your best trench coat, as we know. Vera lays down the law with Marco. She's basically like, look, I don't want to be your good time girl, your like midnight fling or whatever. And I actually love Vera so much for this because it's like, yeah, girl, like finally put your foot down and get what you want. And so they both decide they're done with their hoe days and they want to settle down together. And I think that's beautiful.
It is beautiful, and I wanted this for them so much.
Listen, we can pretend the movie didn't happen.
You can. That would make so many things so much better. But alright, we'll get to the movie in a second. Lorna mends fences by inviting Dr. Narendra for dinner, which is really nice.
Yeah. And the show ends with Lorna and Gladys overlooking the factory floor, talking about how the battle at El Alamein seems like it's going to be a real turning point in the war. And they're quoting Churchill saying, now this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. And I thought that was like not the worst ending to a TV show.
No, it's not. I don't know. I wasn't ready for the show to be over. But I also was getting a little bored, so maybe it was good it was over.
Yeah, it got canceled. I think they were maybe expecting to get a third season and then found out they were not, and that's why they ended up making the movie.
Speaking of, so let's get to the sad movie, Bone Girls Facing the Enemy, which was directed by Jerry Ciccariti and written by Donald Martin. Yeah, this movie is a thing.
It's certainly a thing. You don't have to watch it. If you liked the TV show and you're happy with the way it ended, you don't need to watch the movie.
So it does pick up a little bit after the show has ended, but Kate is back in the factory by day and she's singing by night. And we find out that Ivan's married to a woman named Helen, played by Catherine Berube. But Helen is not a very nice person. Helen works for the Green Line at the factory, which is not the line that the other ladies are in. But the Green Line is testing a new type of TNT, but it's actually a cover for a secret operation. Ooh. Making range recorders to help the Allied ships detect the U-boats that we were talking about earlier. Do you pronounce this Aztec? The Aztec program, I think? Maybe? Sounds a little questionable. It's the underwater anti-submarine detection system that helped turn the tide of the war for the Allies. So very cool.
Yes. So this is based on a real program. Vera and Marco's relationship is going great, but she wants to do more for the war effort, and she's thinking about enlisting in the CWAC, the Canadian Women's Army Corps.
Very cool. And I thought this was a little bit out of left field for Vera.
I also thought that.
I just thought she wasn't that much of an idealist. Like, she just wants to live her life the way she wants to live her life.
Yeah, a huge part of her subplots in the past have been her getting a little bit of validation from other people, especially men, and liking the way that makes her feel. But she's also really self-aware, and she starts to understand herself more and sort of stand up for what she wants. And then you kind of think that, okay, well, now she has Marco and she's finally happy. You know, they're probably going to settle down. She seems to like her job in the office. And then all of a sudden she's like, I want to enlist in the CWAC. And you're like, did the writers just do this because they didn't know what else to do? They're like, Vera and Marco are finally happy. How do we fuck this up for them?
They're not unhappy enough.
Yeah.
Boy, they did manage to make them unhappy in this movie. One of them will be very unhappy.
So Gladys is completing her spy training at the farm, which is Camp X, and she's soon due to go on her first mission, I think. Many Allied ships are being sunk by U-boats due to defective range recorders, and they suspect that these range recorders are being sabotaged. And so the ships go to use them when they think there's a U-boat in the area, and the machines don't work. And then Clifford Perry gets murdered. And I don't know about you, but I was stoked about that. I was like, bye.
Yes, but also no, because I'd finally kind of gotten used to him, and then he gets murdered in like scene 2 of the movie.
It's very cloak and dagger. And then Gladys discovers his body. And this actually prompts the spy masters to believe that the sabotage is likely happening before the range recorders leave Canada. So they're like, yeah, they're probably getting sabotaged here because whoever's doing it is probably the one who killed Clifford Perry. And so Gladys has to return to Victory Munitions, but undercover this time, to work quality assurance on the quote unquote green line.
I hate this plot so much. It's just, I don't like anyone. I don't like Gladys. I don't like Ivan or Ivan's wife. I don't know what's going on. They make me hate everyone.
Yeah, we talked about this already, but this whole plot line to me was always the least believable and the most silly. And then when they made the movie, they really focused on this. Like, I don't know if you also thought this, but to me, it seemed like this was the Gladys movie, and then everyone else got crummy subplots thrown at them that didn't really go anywhere because the writers were like, we don't care about them. This is all about Gladys being a spy, which I thought was the weakest plot line.
It was, and I agree because when the show started, it's very much started around Gladys, so that makes sense to me. But then as the show progressed, each of the women in the show became as important as the other one. And now this became the stupid spy movie that wasn't very good as a spy movie. So, I don't know.
No.
I kind of miss the chummy girls dynamic too. Like, it was just Gladys being kind of a dick to everyone because she was undercover.
I know that is a big part of the show. It's the dynamics and the friendships between the ladies at the factory. No, I totally agree.
Lorna and Bob are now empty nesters as Sheila has married Dr. Narendra. I must have missed this in the movie.
There's a little scene where Sheila invites Lorna to her baby shower, and Lorna's like, "Oh, why don't I bring this? Why don't I bring that?" And Sheila's like, "You don't have to bring anything. Just be chill and come to the baby shower."
Lorna discovers that as Gladys returns to the factory, she hears a cover story about having enlisted and then having been let go from the CWAC. And she tries to help her actually get back in there by calling one of her contacts. But, of course, this contact has no idea who Gladys is because she never joined the CWACs. And Lorna confronts Gladys about it, but Gladys fabricates a really weak story about a miscarriage. And I thought this made me ache a little bit because Lorna's miscarriage was very real. Gladys uses that to make her relate to her, and I didn't like it.
I didn't like it either. I thought it was awful, like a really awful thing to have done. I wasn't sure that it felt. Gladys has done thoughtless things before, but they're usually not malicious. And this felt mean to me, that like it didn't really feel like it was in keeping with things she's done before. And I also just thought it was wild that, like, so she works for this spy agency that develops this cover story for her and all this stuff. They didn't bother to have a contact with the CWAC to be like, hey, if someone calls, tell them that Gladys was here.
I'm sure that in actual secret missions like this, there would have been a contact at CWAC.
Yeah. And also, like, Gladys never thought in a million years that her cover story could be blown. Like, she didn't think about this in advance.
It's so easy for that to come out, and it's not true. It's lazy writing is what it is.
It is, yeah. Gladys tracks down Betty, who spent a few months in prison for the death of Kate's father. It sounds like she didn't actually go to prison for the murder, but she got jail time for leaving the scene of the crime and failing to report or whatever. Anyway, it's just so foolish because it was clearly an accident. Nobody murdered this man, but whatever. So she spent some time in prison, and now she's an amateur boxer, and she throws fights for money. And Gladys tracks her down because she's like, the only person who can help me on the green line with quality assurance is my friend Betty. And you're like, okay.
I like Betty, so I'm glad that Betty's back.
Yes, and Betty and Kate reunite. And that's when Kate explains that she tried to stop Betty from taking the fall for her. And Betty's like, well, you wouldn't have survived in prison.
Yeah, which is a little dramatic.
Yeah.
Helen is Ivan's wife, tries to get suspicion on Jacob Berman, played by Jamie Ellman, who is Gladys' boss at the factory, but also a fellow agent. I already forgot his name. Gladys is already suspicious of him and another worker, Jane Smith. What a name, too, to call her Jane Smith. When she finds out that Jane has falsified her papers to get security clearance, and she also has secretly German parents, this seems to confirm her suspicions that they are spies, so she has Jane arrested. But then she finds out that neither Jane or Berman are actually spies, so now she's gotten two people in trouble. They haven't done anything wrong. Now Berman and Gladys are both suspicious of Helen. So it's a little bit of a back and forth.
Yeah, Helen had told Gladys that she saw, this cracked me up. She said she saw Jacob eating bacon at a diner and he's Jewish. And she's like, if he's lying about that, what else is he lying about? And then when Gladys first accuses Jacob of being the double agent, she's like, well, do you eat bacon? And he was like, no, I don't eat bacon. And she was like, ah. So now they're like both suspicious of Helen because they're like, she made up this bacon story.
What do you think of Jacob?
I like him better than Clifford Perry as, I don't know, a spy, I guess. I think he's fine. I feel like Gladys has a lot of romantic relationships in this show with guys where I'm like, I don't see any spark or charisma between them or anything. And I don't understand where this is coming from, but he's all right.
I'm still disappointed that Gladys's flyboy, her pilot boyfriend, her fake fiance boyfriend that she got letters from is never mentioned again.
I was gonna say, I'm convinced the writers forgot about him entirely.
Yeah, it would have been a nice ending. Like if all these relationships that Gladys has had not happened, it would have been a nice ending if this pilot returns and he's actually a nice guy. They end up together. I would have liked that for an ending.
I honestly think, though, that a normal, stable relationship is not exciting enough for Gladys.
Fair. Yeah, she likes a little bit of drama.
She does. Marco's parents are very against him enlisting for the obvious reasons, because the Canadian government imprisoned his dad. But Vera does enlist in the CWAC, and before she ships out, Marco proposes to her and she accepts.
I hate everything about this already. Not because of the engagement. I like the engagement. But I hate everything else.
Right? Everything that happens after this, I'm like, it's not gospel fact. It's not canon.
Yeah, so Lorna, who's actually a good person, tries to help Gladys by bringing her some books about miscarriages, but then also discovers that Gladys has a gun, and now she's worried that Gladys might be depressed and might be trying to take her own life.
Yeah,
this just made me sad.
Lorna's being such a sweetheart, and Gladys is being such a dick. Just like, get out of my apartment, Lorna.
So Gladys tells her spy boss, Philip Davis, played by Anthony Lemke, that she suspects Helen and wants to investigate her. He agrees, but then immediately tells Helen, and we find out that actually she and Davis are working together. Oh no, they killed Clifford Perry. What a twist, guys.
You know what? I'm glad they killed Clifford Perry. Controversial take. His accent was bad.
They had to plan to blow up the train carrying the bad range recorders to cover their tracks. And also to kill Gladys.
Yeah, they're going to kill her with this incendiary pen. So Marco receives a letter from Vera and he reads it out of the factory. And Helen very helpfully suggests that all the factory workers write her back. And so she gives Gladys this trick pen. But then Gladys ends up dropping it, and of course, Ivan picks it up, and he is killed in the ensuing explosion.
No! I hated this so much.
Yeah, it was really unfortunate. Poor Ivan.
It's also entirely unnecessary for him to die. Why? Right. What's the point in him dying?
It's true, and I feel like they were trying to imply that Kate was still into him, and I just was not really getting that vibe from her at all. So I was like, well, okay.
And I think maybe they're also trying to imply for a second that Helen is actually sad.
It seems like Helen is sad about him dying, but also, I mean, we find out that their whole marriage is a sham. Like, she just married him to get into the factory. But that doesn't mean that she's not sad about his dying. Two things can be true.
Yeah, and then she also blames Kate for his death, which is not fair.
Right. She's like, because Kate had approached Ivan to talk to him in the canteen. And she's like, if you hadn't talked to him, he would have left the canteen. And I'm like, Kate didn't know that he was holding a bomb in his hands. You knew that he was holding a bomb in his hands because you put it there. Jacob Berman becomes suspicious of Davis because he reports what happened with the explosion. And Davis seems to already know that Ivan is dead. And Berman's like, well, how would he know that? Because I'm his contact at the factory. Plus, it's been pre-established that Davis is the one who vetted Helen as a spy. So they're like, well, if Helen is dirty, then like probably Davis is too. And so Gladys and Berman start to devise a plan to take them down. And they also make out because it wouldn't be a Gladys subplot without some ill-advised making out.
Yeah, I didn't get any chemistry whatsoever between these two. I feel like it was just done to give Gladys another happy ending or something. They could have just been co-workers and not have kissed. It would have been fine.
It really would have been fine.
Betty returns to boxing by night because she wants money, promising to throw the fight, but Marco instead convinces her not to. She makes enough money to finally buy the house she's been dreaming of. Thanks to Marco, actually.
Lorna, who once again is being a badass motherfucker, she goes to confront the factory boss because he just wants to keep running the factory. And she's like, we have an unexplained explosion in a bomb factory and you're not investigating it and trying to figure out what happened. Like, you're going to get all these workers killed. And he doesn't like that. And she ends up getting fired, which is like another plotline that doesn't really get resolved.
Marco gets a telegram stating that Vera has been killed in action. Her ship was in a convoy that was targeted by U-boats, and I hated this. It's unnecessary.
I feel like they killed her because her ship probably had one of the bad range recorders, right? So it didn't know where the U-boats were, tying her into this whole range recorder plotline. But I'm also like, you killed her for what?
Yeah, I also don't like that she wasn't able to return and join in whatever ending the show has. She was such a big part of the show. Now she just dies off camera.
I know. And she was one of those characters where you were really rooting for her to have a happy ending because she had so much terrible shit happen to her. And you're like, Vera deserves better, like justice for Vera. And then they're like, no, actually, she's going to be killed off screen.
Kate invites Davis, Berman and Gladys figure out how the range recorders are being sabotaged. So Gladys then recruits Lorna, Betty, and Kate to help her take down Helen and Davis. Everybody now knows about this.
I thought, aren't you under the Official Secrets Act? Like, why are you telling literally everyone about what's happening? And then their plan is wild. I guess they got to keep Davis distracted. And he had previously shown an interest in Kate when she was singing at the bar. And so she just invites him over to her house and hits on him a whole bunch. And so she's keeping him busy. And meanwhile, Lorna and Gladys go to Helen's house to confront her. I was like, you don't like... just you guys are just going to go confront this like notorious double agent by herself. And so the people are pulling out guns. And then eventually Helen's really reluctant to confess, but Lorna talks her into it. They tell her that her father's been arrested because he had a part in the train explosion where they had blown up the train to get rid of the bad range recorders. So she's like, yes, okay, I was involved, but it was Davis that killed Clifford Perry. And meanwhile, Davis obviously starts to become suspicious of Kate, but he ends up getting arrested before anything can really happen. So I'm just like, this plan is so harebrained. I don't understand.
Yeah, and also Kate, like, seducing him seems very unlike Kate.
Yeah.
As if she's suddenly able to be the sexy... It's weird.
Right. And also, what was Betty's role in this exactly? She was just hanging out in the other room with Jacob, listening to the recording on the wire to make sure that Davis didn't hurt Kate. But otherwise, what was her need to know basis? She was barely involved.
Oh, right. So Gladys and Berman are going to undertake a new secret undercover mission. I wonder if they're also going to be under the covers together, probably.
Yeah, they make some like dumb little exchange about like, we'll have to pretend to be husband and wife, and like, oh, we'll have to make it look realistic.
And then they kiss like 6 times because they're practicing.
Yeah, no intimacy coordinator on the set of Bomb Girls.
Nope.
Kate goes through, we're supposedly meant to think she goes through a whirlwind of emotions after Ivan's death. She spends like 12 seconds blaming herself for everything that's ever happened. And then she gets better and she pulls through and she decides to pursue a career in singing.
Woohoo! And then the show ends with Vera's memorial, where Marco turns up in a uniform, as he has finally enlisted. And then the group of ladies and Marco sing When the Lights Go On Again by Vera Lynn.
I really honestly thought that this scene could have been emotionally affecting, but I was so fucking mad that they fridged Vera that I was like, no!
I also was just kind of glad it was over, so I didn't even listen to the entire song.
You were like, fuck this song. Just turn it off.
And there's like a title card as well saying some stuff about the rest of the war, but I don't remember what it says.
No, it's literally just a super brief 2-liner about the ASDIC program. That's it.
Huh.
So the movie leaves off at some point in like 1943, and then we don't find out what happens to anyone after the war. But honestly, after how terrible the movie was, it's like, well, gosh, who could say?
So we have some notes about this show, right? Because it's not all drama.
I was excited about this too because my great aunt Vicky was a bomb girl, and she actually worked at the factory in Ajax, which is like the factory that Vic View is based on. So there was a technical consultant on the show named Louise Johnson, and she was also a real bomb girl. She was recruited from Western Canada to come and live and work at this sort of self-sustaining community complex. So everyone lived on the site. There was housing, there was a school, there was like recreational facilities. They had their own water and sewer systems. And this was later to become the town of Ajax outside of Toronto. But at the time, it was basically just like a big complex for building munitions. And they started building it in 1940 and went on to employ 9,000 employees at its height of production. And they had made 40 million shells by 1945, which is pretty crazy.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So the women worked 6 days a week. They made 42 cents an hour. And they lived in residences that housed 100 women each. And the compound was actually surrounded by barbed wire and patrolled by 275 guards. And so it would not have been like it is in the show where it's like everyone coming and going. Although you do see a little bit in the show, they have to kind of check in at the front gate when they come in and that kind of stuff. As depicted in the show, any static could generate a spark and subsequent explosion. So all the women showered and changed before starting work. They were forbidden from wearing jewelry. They were issued leather shoes. Being caught with matches was a federal offense punishable with a jail sentence. There was a blizzard in December of 1944 that was so intense that it killed 21 people, but the plant never stopped. They didn't stop working. Like it was constant. They were always running. And Louise, who was the consultant on the show, her job by the end of the war, she had started out on the floor and she sort of moved up. And her job was to type up quit slips as the work began to slow. And so as everyone left and stopped working at the factory, she would type up these quit slips. And she was actually the last person remaining at the plant. And the last quit slip she typed was her own.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. And this is from the book Extraordinary Women, Extraordinary Times, Canadian Women of World War II by Sherry Pringle. The internment camp at Petawawa, in which Marco's father is interned, was real. There was an internment camp there. It was first used for German, Austrian, and Italian POWs during World War I. And at the outset of World War II, more than 40 internment camps opened up nationwide to hold 24,000 German, Italian, and Japanese Canadians. Italians and Germans were picked up based on what they called, quote unquote, reasonable suspicion. So like Marco's father in the show, they were often affiliated with German or Italian organizations. And after Pearl Harbor, 12,000 Japanese Canadians on the West Coast were expelled from their homes, had their property confiscated and sold, and were moved to, they called them housing centers in the interior. And some labor leaders and Communist Party members were also interned. And the Canadian government actually apologized and paid reparations in 1988 to remaining citizens who had been in the internment camps. And they also revoked the War Measures Act that had allowed the internments to take place in the first place. So they replaced it with new legislation that would make it much more difficult for the government to essentially strip citizens of their rights during wartime based on their nationality.
That's
and
good.
Marco represents one of the 31,000 Italian Canadians who had to register as quote unquote enemy aliens and report to the police once a month.
Oh, it's like being on probation.
Yeah.
I thought this was an interesting show to watch. I just didn't like how it ended, but we should rate it. And we're going to rate it out of Gladys's ill-advised romantic affairs out of 10. Because there are many, so I'm not sure if there were actually 10, but there might have been.
Listen, there might have been.
Yeah, what would you rate this movie, Sam? The movie and the show together as one thing.
Well, I'm going to rate them separately because I don't feel like it's fair to rate them together.
Okay.
You know what? I would rate the show 7. Gladys's ill-advised romantic affairs out of 10. I really like that they clearly took care to research sort of the social aspect of what was happening on the home front during the war. Every little detail that they include, you can tell that a lot of love and research went into it. Like people took a lot of pains to have it be accurate, even down to the costuming and that kind of stuff. And so I really enjoyed that aspect. I really liked that it was a show about Of course, there were male characters, but predominantly about female friendship, about these women really working in unprecedented times in this munitions factory and telling a story that we don't often get told. So I enjoyed the show. I thought it was worth a watch. The movie, I'm only going to give it a 4 Gladys's ill-advised romantic affairs out of 10. I really thought they took the weakest plot line and ran with it. They sort of just threw a bunch of crummy plot lines to the other women. It didn't seem cohesive or coherent the way the show did. So yeah, I definitely did not enjoy the movie as much.
Right. Since you rated the series and the movie separately, I'm also going to do that, but I'm going to rate season 1, season 2, and the movie. So I'm going to do 3 ratings. Because I'll rate the first season at 7.5 because I really enjoyed it. And I'll rate the second season 6. I'll rate the movie a 3 because I was just really bored. Like I said, the first season I thought had some nice build-ups and everything made sense. And then season 2, I just felt sad that some of the storylines weren't finished or were just ignored. And I just didn't like it as much. And the movie was shit. So, my rating.
Well, I don't think we're alone thinking the movie was shit. It seems like a pretty common opinion online that people are like, yeah, we just pretend the movie didn't happen.
Yeah, and I kept falling asleep, so I can't really rate it any more than a 3. That brings us to a conclusion of our Rum Girls run. And I really enjoyed it, even though I didn't rate it that high. But I did like seeing a thing about women in World War II. So, yay!
Yes, and I'm always excited about a Canada mention, as you know.
Whoop! Yeah, agree. Are you reading anything?
I am reading a novel called Salt Blood by Francesca de Torres. And I listened to a podcast where they interviewed her. And basically, this is a novel, but she really, really thoroughly researched it. She was like, well, I didn't include anything in the novel that you could directly contradict by research from real life. So like it's a novel, but it's pretty accurate. And it's about Mary Read, who was a famous female pirate. So it's really cool. Like so far, the beginning of the book is all about how Mary spent the good chunk of her early years disguised as a boy because her half-brother had died. And her half-brother's father was a wealthy man. So her mom pretended that Mary was the dead half-brother so she could keep getting the money from the wealthy family.
Smart. That sounds good. I am also reading a book. Last week I finished In Memoriam by Alice Wynne about some boys in World War I, which everybody loves, and I thought was just okay. And right now I'm reading Agent Zoe by Claire Mully about an actual spy, a female spy. So I have a bunch of books about female spies. I'm excited to read all of those and then come talk to you about it eventually.
Yes, I'm sure it'll be much more interesting than the terrible Gladys subplot in the movie.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for listening to Rosie the Reviewer again this week. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us and rate us 5 stars. You can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast. And you can reach out to us on any of our social media sites. We're always super excited to have people suggest movies or comment on things or, tell us what you thought about the episode.
Cool. We will see you next week.
Bye-bye.